Hello.
Our story begins inside the Jedi Temple. Anakin Skywalker was 15 years old and he was yearning for adventure. Been a couple years since his elder friend, Palpatine, had tried to convince him to leave the Jedi Order. After a mission with Obi-Wan, he changed his mind. But now he was under the belief that he was missing out on something. This, of course, was his longing for adventure, which was against the Jedi Code or something. All he knew is that Yoda said that Jedi don't seek adventure. But what good was a lifestyle like that? Anakin was becoming an efficient young Jedi, and he wanted more. While Obi-Wan traded his usage of Form 4 to become a dominant master of Form 3, Anakin was growing into his own strength. Kenobi was a terrific teacher. Anakin just didn't appreciate it as much as he should have. If he actually listened, perhaps he'd be further along than he currently was. But that was clearly not the case. Anakin wanted to be so much more than he had. Believing that Master Kenobi was holding him back, he took it upon himself to get what he believed he was worth. There was this place inside the Jedi Temple, and if he could have access to it, he could have the power of the universe at his disposal. This truthfully was selfishness hidden behind adolescent innocence. He didn't understand the true powers of the Force, and while the code of the Jedi would be seen as dogmatic or narrow, there was a reason some of these powers were off limits to knights and even masters. There were certain reasons why only few could use certain powers that no one else could. It took a master to truly understand the power of the Force and to utilize some of his greatest abilities. Anakin, not knowing, or at least not understanding that, decided that he would try and learn what he could. He was told to go spend some time in the Jedi Archives anyways, so why not make some fun out of it? Obi-Wan and Anakin had a spar and Skywalker lost, but instead of yielding like one typically does during a spar, Anakin got angry and frustrated, so he thrashed at Obi-Wan. It was a misstep and he didn't mean anything by it, but he could have very easily hurt Obi-Wan. The reason he didn't actually kill or injure his master was because Obi-Wan was quick enough to respond to the move and defend himself. In response to Anakin's actions, he was being banished to the Archives until Obi-Wan was finished discussing the event with the High Council. While Anakin didn't really see anything wrong with his actions, his eager mind didn't even try to grasp why he was in trouble for trying to be a good swordsman. He was misinterpreting the event incredibly badly because of his own narrow and dogmatic view on the world around him. Truly ironic. It was because of this event that he thought his master was actively trying to hold him back. He walked around the Archives a little bit, hiding between bookshelves and watching Jedi Masters and such at work. Most of them were studying or reading. He didn't pay them any mind, and they didn't pay him any mind either. It was perfect, so he continued forward, shuffling around. He caught sight of Master Jocasta. She was walking with a couple of her archivists or aides, who were following her around. He couldn't hear much, but it sounded like she wanted them to reorganize a fifth cube on the left side of the restricted section. She said that Master Krell accidentally misplaced some of the items, and they were unorganized. She stopped and turned back. She'd said something else to the aides, but Anakin couldn't listen in, as another conversation between two masters walked past him and overrode his ability to hear Master Jocasta. Skywalker shouted her around, not actively following behind her, but walking in between shelves as she continued to the restricted section. The aides had broken off by this point, so Anakin assumed that she told them that she would do it herself. Though Anakin couldn't for the life of him understand why she would let her aides do it, he figured that Master Krell must have been looking for some interesting stuff, and he wanted in. Anakin hadn't yet tried to get into the restricted section, but he always liked to watch masters enter it. He was always in the Archives. He wasn't ever reading or studying, but Obi-Wan had him in there a lot. His hopes were that Anakin would become a far greater Jedi than he could have ever hoped to be. Anakin just saw it as an outlandish punishment. Why would he force Anakin to do something so mundane and boring? There's an entire galaxy outside the temple. Regardless, Anakin watched Master Jocasta walk up to the control panel and open her hand. She walked into the room, and the door closed behind her as she entered. Anakin counted on his fingers and in his mind. He got 2 answers though. On his fingers he had 7 seconds, in his mind he had 9, so for the sake of getting into the restricted section he went with 7 seconds. There weren't any bookshelves near the restricted section, so he needed to be diligent. Luckily for him, he was a troubled individual. He could make anything work. He found a cart that was nearby. It was full of holodiscs and such. He knew that Jocasta would be upset if she saw it out without an aide or an archivist anywhere near it. He waited, and then the doors opened. Jocasta was looking for something else she forgot. It was because she wasn't initially supposed to be the individual to do the work inside the restricted section. It caught Anakin off guard. He wasn't anywhere near the door, but as she left the room, she saw the cart aimlessly sitting outside the door. He saw her take a deep breath, and so he did the same, throwing his feet to the floor as fast as he could, trying to keep himself quiet. There was no one else around them. Anakin used the Force to knock a couple of discs and books off the cart. As he got closer to the door, his mind counted down to 3 seconds. He could hear the books hit the ground, but the door started to close. He had 1 shot. With all of his strength, he threw himself at the door. It was a small crevice, and thankfully Skywalker hadn't hit his growth spurt yet, because if he had, he might have lost a leg or two. He slammed down on the ground on the interior of the archives. He felt his shoulder and it didn't feel good, but he looked up with a crazy grin. He did it. He was in. Skywalker looked around the room. He was so interested in finding out the secrets of the Jedi. Not for nothing, he always hated learning, but now he would be learning things that he wasn't supposed to know, so somehow that made learning all the more exciting. Anakin shuffled around the shelves, looking for Cube 5 on the left side. Or was it the right side? Hopefully he chose the correct side. He wandered around. The room was still and silent. He thought the archives were silent, but this was on another level. He couldn't hear a thing. It was like the room was both soundproof, but also so quiet that anything could be heard. Though luckily he noticed that he wasn't able to hear his own footsteps. With the dim lighting in the room, it gave him this out-of-body experience. He didn't really know how to feel about it, so he just continued forward. He found the 5th cube, but decided to skip it. He wanted to make sure there was no one else in the room with him. He turned the corner to the back of the restricted section and could see a Jedi Master kneeling. There was a small table in front of them, and their hand was placed gently on top of it. On the table, there was a book, and it was opened. The Jedi's eyes were apparently closed, but they were whispering aloud to themselves. Perhaps they were using the Force to see, but he was unsure. Anakin thought he recognized the Jedi, but he didn't know. Looked like a master on the High Council. Anyways, Anakin made a note of that and continued around, avoiding the Jedi Master and looking for a quiet spot in the room to call his own. Because the restricted section was so dim, Anakin could legitimately hide anywhere he wanted. He just had to be diligent to avoid any masters who came in or out, because he would get in a lot of trouble if he got discovered. Since he had his surroundings discovered, he went to work. He siphoned through every available document he could find. Most of the beginner stuff was stuff like lifting boulders or force heal, rather simple things that were easily accessible to any master. These abilities were the first things taught long ago, before the temple on Coruscant was even built. He thought it was weird that these teachings weren't readily taught these days, especially since they were easy to grab inside the older texts of the Jedi Order. He noted a world he hadn't heard of before, Ahch-To. Apparently the original texts were there, he was just reading through copies. Funnily, Anakin had heard of the planet, he just wasn't paying attention during that lesson. Skywalker continued around, looking into more restricted powers. He saw abilities that some masters could use. He read them all to himself quietly. Shatterpoint, Affliction, Morchiro, Electric Judgment, so much more. Who was Master Yaddle? She apparently was the only one permitted to use Morchiro. How odd. Let's take that one. Anakin read through a couple things and tried to remember it. He wasn't dumb enough to take anything out of the archives. He actually had a small device, so he used it and took images of the documents so he could, at a later time, maybe try and use them. However, Anakin was dumb enough to take something out of the restricted section. Though it wasn't big, it was a small drive. Technically, it was a star map. He saw a name of a Jedi temple and he thought it sounded interesting. It was called the Runa Temple on the planet of Talam. Aside from the Jedi having hundreds of secret locations across the galaxy, for whatever reason, this caught his attention because there was something secret about it. He took the drive and waited patiently. By the looks of things, no one had used these star maps in generations. He waited for the doors to open, and then when they did, he escaped. Though Anakin was in trouble. While it felt like minutes to him, he was inside the restricted section for hours. Obi-Wan was searching for him, and he was pissed off. Kenobi didn't know where Anakin was, but when he found him, he'd let him hear it. So because Anakin realized how much time he was in there, he found a seat in the corner of the archives, so it looked like he was trying to have a quiet study hall. When he got to his location, he pulled up about a dozen tabs on his little informational drive. He had Form 5, Form 3, and a defensive block, the typical things that Anakin would look up. Other things he had pulled up were the Jedi Padawan code, and Coruscant city maps in case they had to go down to a lower level mission. He also pulled up some of his own star maps and started searching for the secret world of Talam. He knew that if the Jedi needed a star map to get to it, then it would likely be far away, but he was surprised to find that it wasn't too difficult to get to. It was right off a smuggler's pathway, and it was just a little ways away from the Rima trade route, which was one of the larger hyperspace lanes. Anakin knew exactly how to get there. Anakin had enough time, due to Obi-Wan searching around the entire temple, to pull out a couple books and discs from the shelves, none of them really corresponding with each other, or with what Anakin was doing or interested in. One of them was Pleasantries of Organic Life on Ossus, and the other one was Microbiology of Midichlorians. It was a dead giveaway to Kenobi that Anakin was messing with him. But when Obi-Wan found him, Anakin submitted that he'd been here the whole time. He just wanted to get introduced to new topics. He turned around to his master and apologized for his actions in their sparring session. He just felt so bad about it. He wanted to just be away from everywhere, afraid that he could hurt someone else. Obi-Wan was dumbfounded. This was incredibly unlike his student. But maybe he was getting through to him. He told his young student that he forgave him, but they needed to work on anger issues and his patience. He would become a knight, but he was only 15, reminding him that he himself was a Padawan until 25, and he only became a knight because he killed Maul. Anakin appreciated these kind words from his master. Obi-Wan also informed Anakin that they were going to be restricted to the temple for a couple of months, until he could get a grasp on his emotions. but Obi-Wan lightly hit Anakin's shoulder and told him that it probably wouldn't take long for them to get their freedom back. Anakin smiled and watched his master as he walked away. That was annoying, but he didn't know how he got away with such a lie. But that was pretty much karma. He now had to act like he was interested in organic life and the microbiology of the midichlorians. Ugh, why didn't he choose something interesting? Well, at least he had his little star map. He pulled it out of his pocket and accessorized it. He was able to get an idea of how he was going to use it, and this little banishment to the temple would be perfect. He would fake an illness and then sneak out. It took a couple days of scheming, especially since Skywalker was a terrible liar, except apparently in certain circumstances. It also took a couple days of him reading up on organic life and the microbiology of the midichlorians with Obi-Wan in the archives. The tragedy, and what killed Anakin the most, is that Obi-Wan was so excited to have something to bond with Anakin over. Kenobi loved learning, and he was a true Jedi and such, so when his student finally had an interest, he was so excited. It would crush him if he ever found out how fake it was. Anyways, Skywalker was able to sneak out of the temple using a Delta 7 interceptor. He did it in the middle of the night, and he used force control to make sure someone didn't snitch. It was one of the many powers he learned inside the archives, ones restricted to Jedi Masters. There was a difference between this and mind trick. He took complete control over an intelligent being's mind and forced them to see him differently. It was just a random Republic citizen too. They had no bearing on the situation at all. Skywalker used a star map to travel through the trade routes and hyperspace lanes till they eventually arrived at the planet. Though the issue is he didn't know where the temple was, so he trusted the Force to guide him to the Runa temple. Talam was a beautiful world, but it looked so desolate. It was all white, but the temperature wasn't cold, it wasn't snow. Then he saw it. His jaw dropped as he flew lower to the ground and planted his ship on the ground. He saw the temple in all of its glory as the cockpit opened up. He smiled and then climbed out of the ship. Anakin started forward, his feet quietly creasing on the ground below him as he looked up at the trees with fluffy leaves above him. It was so ethereal, he didn't know how to grasp it. The wind blew gently through the air, and he took in the smell of the world. It was unlike anything he'd ever experienced before. As he got to the temple, he entered it, and it was pristine, as if it had been maintained every single day up until the moment he walked into it. The floor was a little creaky, but that wasn't a big deal. Skywalker spent hours inside the temple looking around. It was magnificent in his mind. He didn't know what to expect, but eventually he found the archives and looked for more information in the Force. And as he searched, he found the archives lightly filled. Talam wasn't populated with intelligent life, and it wasn't near any other populated planets either, so the Jedi could leave behind information if they wanted. It just didn't make sense though. This entire temple was still beautiful, just like the one on Coruscant, yet there was no one here to use it. He didn't understand. As he siphoned through the archives, he found something called a Force Sever. It turns out that in a schism long ago, the Jedi had lost their ability to use the Force. The Jedi who turned on them used Force Sever on the Grand Master and then killed off all of his students. The Jedi was left to rot inside the temple. At the time, there were multiple Grand Masters for the multiple Jedi temples, long before the era of the Old Republic. The Grand Master decided to leave behind a number of recordings, being that it was the only thing to do. In all those recordings, he gave information about these forbidden powers. Maybe it was hypocritical, or maybe it was madness, but the Grand Master, despite his best student falling to the darkness, believed that in warning the future generations, they would stay clear of these abilities. Skywalker saw what the Force could do. In the mind of the late Grand Master, he believed that the Jedi who came to this temple would see the warning, know the powers he and his student discovered, and steer clear of them. Use them as identifiable abilities for keeping the evil Sith away from the light. A way to purge the darkness, but none of that would do him any good when Skywalker discovered it. The tragedy of the Grand Master from Talam was that his student left him without the Force, without the ability to communicate with any other Jedi, and without the ability to leave the planet. His student was eventually killed by a collection of other Grand Masters across the galaxy, but it came years after discovering what happened to the Master of the Runa Temple. His body was last buried under the temple, and it was believed by the other Jedi that his spirit washed over the Runa Temple. They never could understand why dust never showed up or cracks on the surface never showed. Despite sounding creaky, the temple was in perfect condition. Anakin listened to the recordings, took his information, paid his respects to the fallen Grand Master, and abandoned Talam for good. He was able to sneak back into the Jedi Temple when he returned, though he would be in trouble. The irony is that he would be in trouble because of the mind trick and nothing else. No one knew he was gone because he cleared the Delta 7's ship log, so people just went off what they knew, that one of their workers was acting erratically, and they had to fix it. Skywalker got through under the skin of his teeth, and he was grateful for it. For him, it just meant he could be more reckless. If the Jedi didn't notice anything other than the one thing that he had to do to sneak out, then he could do it more often. For the following years, he would continue to use the Force in ways that many Jedi couldn't understand or ever come to know. His power only amplified because of the power he possessed. In an ironic way, it actually helped him grow because he was focused on learning, on actually using his talents. He wasn't just powerful because of his midichlorian count, he was refining his abilities, something he wouldn't have done otherwise. It was what made his master always more superior than him in lightsaber combat. Obi-Wan was mental when it came to refining his abilities, and making sure that he was using all of his midichlorians to his advantage, just like Plo Koon. Anakin had the luxury of not having to do that, but because he was becoming incredibly powerful. When the Battle of Geonosis came around, Skywalker was exhibiting all the skill of a Jedi Master, potentially more than a Jedi Master. Regardless, his first true show of skill against an opponent came when he confronted Count Dooku for the first time. Obi-Wan and Anakin would meet the Count in a Geonosian structure before he attempted to flee the battle, but the generational talent that was Count Dooku welcomed the joy of dealing these two opponents, believing he could kill them. Skywalker was patient, not as much as Obi-Wan would have liked, but patient enough to not run in like a troglodyte when he saw Count Dooku standing idly. The master and apprentice duo prepared for their engagement, and Skywalker slowly twisted his wrist behind his back. He focused on Dooku and he waited for it to click. He hadn't ever used his power on anyone before. He used a weaker variation of Force Slow, but that never killed anyone. What he was about to do would even surprise him, because there was so much frustration and anger within him that he used the Force in a way that he hadn't before, aside from killing the Tusken Raiders a couple days before. He had flashes, but nothing quite as dark as this. Most of it came from the amount of death around him on Geonosis, between the hundreds of Jedi and the hundreds of clones that were now dying. The Force influenced him to tap into his darker powers. Dooku began the duel, and for the Master and Apprentice, they were able to fend off the aging Count. No matter his age, he was quick to defend himself. He made short work of the Jedi, but he wasn't able to land any disabling hits. While the dark side made his mark on elder individuals, it hadn't started to eat Dooku up yet. But as the fight continued to elongate, he began to struggle. His limbs stiffened, and he couldn't hold his own like he normally could have. Anakin, as the aggressor, out of the two Jedi, took advantage of it. Dooku was getting confused. Arteries inside of his body began to shut down, and his vision became blurry. Anakin pressed further, pushing Dooku back before throwing him into a wall. Skywalker's attacks were violent, and Dooku was barely standing up. Obi-Wan pulled Anakin back before he could swing his blade through Dooku's body. Kenobi looked at the student, who was currently looking through his eyebrows with rage in his face. He was ready to kill him, but he backed away from Dooku, who started bobbing back and forth. Dooku dropped his lightsaber and his skin became pale. Bruises started forming all over his hands and his visible skin. He held his stomach as pain soared through his body. He looked at the two Jedi with confusion as he fell to his knees. He coughed up blood, realizing that this was the end. He would never be able to see the galaxy heal from what he helped set into action. Dooku heard a cane and looked over to see Yoda walking into the room. His heart flatlined and he fell to the ground lifelessly. Anakin beamed at his lightsaber and looked to his master with a grin. The war was one step closer to being over. Obi-Wan just looked down in confusion as Yoda asked what happened. Anakin turned back and he told the Grand Master that they defeated Dooku. It was over. They could end the war. Yoda felt pity for a moment, but then he noticed that his apprentice wasn't slain by lightsaber. He wondered what it was, but he couldn't figure it out. The room was covered in a dark aura. It was as if the Dark Lord the Sith was in the room with them. It didn't make sense to him. He reached out his hand and he felt the Force inside of Dooku's dead body. It was plagued by the dark side. For Yoda, he couldn't tell if this meant that the dark side was flowing through Dooku or he'd been killed by the darkness. Either way, the Force was making its presence known, and it wasn't pleased with how it was being used. Yoda would have to investigate how or what happened. At the moment, he wanted Kenobi and Skywalker away from the premises so that they would not be affected by the darkness in the room. Anakin was so pleased with himself, but he knew that he couldn't tell them that he used a more violent version of Force Affliction called Force Plague. It wasn't something easy to do, but with such a high midichlorian count, Anakin had little to no issues with it. All it took was reading up on the knowledge of how to do it. The death of Dooku had a huge effect on the Separatist movement early on into the war, but it didn't force them to negate the war effort. The way the CIS government saw it was, the Republic invaded Geonosis with an army and 200 Jedi and killed a state official. If anything, it was even more of a reason to get invested into the war effort. Anakin and Obi-Wan were removed from Geonosis as Yoda and a number of council members conducted an investigation into the death of Count Dooku. Being that it was so unnatural, they wouldn't find anything, and on the other side of their investigation, they'd find the Separatists eager to seize revenge on the Republic. Because Anakin was promoted to Jedi Knight, he'd be stationed with the Chancellor due to increasing threats on his life. General Grievous was helming the Malevolence, but Asajj Ventress was on her own lust for revenge. She cut off contact with everyone inside the CIS military and made a target of Palpatine, believing it would be the optimal revenge for what was done to her teacher. In a life full of tragedy and loss, she felt that it was the only path forward. With the CIS moving against the Republic, Palpatine had to make sure he kept his power and continued gaining more. Without Dooku, the CIS government slipped out of its grip, which could be beneficial, but it could also be very costly. Half of them wanted war for the death of Dooku, the other half of them were more interested in peace talks, seeing Dooku as an idealist who would have rather wanted their government to become its own sovereign entity without the Republic. Since Skywalker was with Palpatine the entire time, the secret Sith Lord only encouraged Anakin's use of the Force, though that would backfire on him when Ventress came to assassinate the Chancellor. She'd break through the Chancellor's home and sneak towards his room. There she would encounter Anakin. A fierce lightsaber duel would begin, and Sidious, interested in his future pupil's talent, would come out and watch, as a frightened old man of course. He was so prideful in Skywalker, being that Ventress was such a talented opponent. Anakin struggled, but he was clearly taking advantage of his older opponent. Though he pulled from the knowledge he attained 4 years prior on Talam, he reached out his hand and released a gust of force that sent ripples in every direction from Anakin. He fell backwards at the shock, but so did Asajj and Palpatine. He turned his attention to both of them, seeing that they had the same reaction. Asajj realized that she could no longer use the Force, and panic washed over her body as she fled from the scene. Palpatine, on the other hand, was even more worried. While he was a smart man, so much of his intuition came from his intense connection with the Force. Without it, he was nothing but a simple Chancellor, and all but to say that his quest for power was worthless without the Force. He was so taken aback, but Anakin was quick to come to his aid and ask him if he was alright. Palpatine was simply in hysterics. He didn't know how to react, which forced Anakin to profusely apologize, believing that he had done something to his best friend, when in reality, the dilemma had nothing to do with him, well technically. Palpatine was able to regather his composure and requested that Anakin chase down the perpetrator. He'd be safe, as a number of Senate guards rushed him. Anakin listened to those orders as they went out. Palpatine became inconsolable. He no longer had the Force. How is this possible? While similarly to the Grand Master on the Runa Temple, every single Jedi lost their ability to use the Force when the student used the power. It had a large radius when she used it, and it did the same when Skywalker used it here. But the only people who could be affected were Asajj and Palpatine. It was an unlucky turn of events for the Sith Lord, and as he realized that he was no longer a Sith Lord, his entire world turned upside down. Everything he was built off of being a Sith. Without it, he was no one, and in the coming weeks, the pressure of being literally no one would eat him alive, consuming him to the point where he could no longer handle it. Republic headlines were mixed with positivity and negativity. Jedi Generals Mace Windu and Plo Koon defeated a separatist superweapon called the Malevolence, but at the same time the Galactic Senate was in chaos. The Chancellor had reportedly thrown himself off of his balcony, and now the Republic was in dire need of a leader to stand up for the people. Anakin Far was a senator to take up such a mantle. He was in the middle of a pack type of senator, a good ally to Padme Amidala. Because Anaconda was so adored, he was able to, with the help of both Padme and Mina Bontiri, get the Republic and the CIS to the talking table. The head of the Neutral System Coalition was also in favor of this, offering up the Palace of Sundari to be used for the peace talks, considering Duchess Satine's Mandalore was neutral territory. At the same time, the Jedi Council dispatched Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi to Seleucami to deal with General Grievous. Since Anakin had been on the front line since Geonosis, he wasn't assigned to a task force, which in turn meant that he would join up with Kenobi and the 501st under Captain Rex, the 212th having been assigned to General Pong Krell. By the time Anakin was being dispatched to Seleucami, he was pretty unstable. His friend ended his own life, and it ripped a hole in his heart. But as it turns out, once you take something away so precious from someone, they lose all sense of control. Regardless of how evil Sidious was, he was entirely bound to the Sith. Without it, he had nothing. Sure, the Republic and becoming Emperor, but what was the point? He couldn't build a legacy loyal to him. Without him, the Sith were dead. Everything he cared about died without that power. He noticed it in the waning days of his life. He wasn't as intuitive. He was weak. He wasn't a powerful being. He was just a man, and that wasn't a life worth living in his own opinion. Skywalker blamed himself. He handled the loss of Palpatine with great heartache, but to blame himself for the actions of another only crushed his demeanor more. What made it worse is that he was left to suffer on Coruscant alone. He had no battalion, so it wasn't like he could go onto the battlefront to find a distraction in the days after. He had some time with Padme, but it was only the day after it happened. She had to leave Coruscant to rally together a caucus of her constituents to aid the peacemaking process. Though she was very direct with them, expressing that she would do as much as she could. But the moment to be a leader was upon her. Having been queen since she was 14, she understood how important the politics were at the moment. She couldn't sacrifice the galaxy for anything, even him. Anakin was relieved when he was dispatched to help Kenobi capture and/or destroy Grievous. It would mean the end of the war was one step closer to coming to a conclusion. So despite Anakin's hard feelings, he locked himself in. The battle at Seleucami wasn't held in space. It was a ground battle, with fleet combat in the atmosphere. General Grievous was trying to lay low. There were rumors of Admiral Trench's survival, and he was trying to get some reinforcements to rebel against the Separatist government. General Grievous knew it was coming, and he refused to allow the Jedi scum to stop him from galactic domination. He didn't know that he was just a piece of the puzzle, but he felt like he had a chance to become more than just that. He believed that he could be this great leader, that is until the Republic arrived. His capital ship was hit first. which caused him to evacuate the vessel, and because the hangars were destroyed within the first surprise volley from the Venators, he was forced to the ground. Troops landed around him to aid him in the fight, as General Skywalker and Kenobi joined their men on the ground. Battle droids came down in overwhelming numbers, but it didn't stop the clones from putting up an intense fight against the Separatists. Captain Rex and the 501st put their best foot forward, and in the air, clone bombers were making short work out of the Separatists. General Grievous was buying time until he'd get a vessel to get him off this rock. The only issue is, each of those escaped vessels kept getting blown out of the sky. Obi-Wan and Anakin engaged Grievous in a lightsaber duel. Obi-Wan's defensive form was built for this, but because Anakin's ability to be patient and let the fight form around him, he was able to be powerful in countering the droid general. Though there was a moment during the battle where Grievous was able to break free from their duel. The last surviving Separatist frigate was making an escape from the battlefield, and Grievous was able to get a small shuttle off the ground to said ship. Without missing a beat, Anakin reached out his hands, not knowing how or why, but instinctually, he gripped the frigate's engines. General Kenobi and Captain Rex looked at the Chosen One as he ripped the Separatist frigate from the sky, the engines exploding and combusting into a bundle of flames, as the ship itself began to slowly descend from the atmosphere. General Grievous had already landed inside the hangar bay, and was in for a rude awakening. Obi-Wan didn't even question what he was seeing, as he ordered all available V-Wings to encircle the ship to make sure no one escaped. But Anakin was apparently already on top of that. His arms reached out, and he closed his eyes. In a reaction to the power and anger that came out, Skywalker's body began to shake, his limbs rattling from the inside out. He could feel the darkness rising from within. All the pain over losing his friend Palpatine to such a horrendous death built up. The anger he had at himself for something so far out of his control led him to feel his rage into power. The vessel could be heard screeching without engines as it barreled towards the surface. Anakin gave it some extra incentive, twisting his hands and forcing the ship to fall even faster. Skywalker grinned when he watched the explosion rip through the sky. He fell down to his knees and took a deep breath. The pain of Palpatine's death sitting presently, and then it clicked. In a moment, rare for him, of self-realization, he understood. It finally all made sense. He caught his breath as his head fell down gently into the ground, as he felt the soft grass touch his forehead. After using all of his anger, all of his strength, everything he'd spent the last 4 years learning, he didn't gain anything. To use all that power to destroy the Separatist ship and potentially kill Grievous, the dark side didn't give, it only took. He felt weaker, and with all of his guards down, he was more vulnerable to the negativity, the pain, and weakness. He understood that true strength comes from peace of both mind and heart, and a surge of regret came over him. Not for killing Dooku, severing the Force from Ventress, or destroying Grievous. He would have still done them, but it was the way that he went about doing it. He used anger, fury, and rage to do it. If he was meant to be a Jedi, which he did believe he was meant to be, despite his marriage, then he needed to act like a Jedi. Obi-Wan came over to Anakin's side, gently placing his hand on Anakin's back, asking if he was alright. Skywalker snapped back into the moment, and turned around looking at his master, nodding his head. He told him that he was. Obi-Wan asked what just happened, and Anakin turned back with a bit of a smile on his face, and he just shrugged his shoulders, expressing that if he told him, then he probably wouldn't believe it. The death of Grievous heralded potential for peace, though it would involve the Separatist government, or in other words, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, requesting their independence from the Republic. Ironically, the sentiment was being backed by the Neutral Systems Coalition, being that they wanted their own form of government away from the Republic. The Mandalore Accords would result in a three-party galactic system, all of them communicating with each other and having no real aggression towards the other. This only helped out those less fortunate inside the Outer Rim. It meant there were three large powers willing to put aid outwards. The Jedi were seen as the heroes of the war. This went for the Republic at least. There were technically no victors, but for Republic morale, they crowned themselves as the victors of the war, because they won the last battle, even though the war was technically over when the battle happened. Regardless, this had Anakin vouching for movements inside the Outer Rim, and towards the Slaver Empires, something that he neglected to mention over the years to the Jedi Council. As a Jedi Knight, he felt as if he had more voice, but that wasn't necessarily the case. The Council would have listened to him if he was a Padawan or a Knight. Either way, especially if he was under the belief that there was a Slaver Empire in the galaxy. Because Anakin and Obi-Wan did so well together, they were permitted to go on this mission and set things right. So they went as undercover slaves for a couple of days, until the Zagarian Queen found an interest in Anakin. Since Anakin was here on a mercenary mission for the slaves, he decided he would cheat his little rule bending. He wanted to try Master Yaddle's famed Morachiro, but first he used a more advanced version of Mind Trick, and used force domination to get the Queen to publicly denounce slavery and openly inform the other syndicates that if they owned slaves, they'd be at war with the Zagarians. Considering the syndicates were all on edge, this was the last thing they needed. The Pikes were the first ones to fire, and then the war broke out. The Jedi evacuated after freeing their slaves. Eventually, Anakin would reveal his secrets to Obi-Wan. and then show him the Runa temple on Talam. Kenobi never spoke of it to anyone else, allowing Anakin to break the news if he wanted. He wouldn't, though his temptation to leave the Order would be strong. With Anakin Far becoming Chancellor, Padme was able to take a step back as Senator, which allowed her and Anakin more time together. He almost left the Order but decided against it, due to firstly getting a student and secondly deciding that the life of serving others would be beneficial. Chancellor Far would kick the corporate alliances out of the Galactic Senate, forcing them to work under the jurisdiction of the Confederacy, Republic, and Neutral Systems Coalition. Ironically, Anakin would withhold most of the information he learned. He would teach the lesser, more Jedi-like iterations of each power, but never the full versions he used during the war. Afraid his students would end up like the Pride of the Jedi Temple on Talam. That would never be the case. The Sith were gone, and the Jedi found itself new peace in the newly reforming galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. This video was requested by a Grand Tier patron. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT 7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Malik, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Youngling Slayer 66, Magnetic Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Borders Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button if you want to support me in other ways. Go check out the Patreon. Early access to the Sith Clone Wars and animations are available on there. Anyways, let's talk about the story. This is kind of like what if Anakin had full power during the Clone Wars, but not at the same time. The whole emphasis of him gaining these new powers in the Force because he's actually learning is kind of the difference here. And so he only finds interest in things that he shouldn't learn. And it provides this moment for him to have like the self-realization that he realizes that like using these powers isn't what it's meant to be. He uses them for good, but he realizes that they can become more than just good. They can become really negative and really hurt people if they're used the wrong way. And so that was kind of the whole point of it, where he doesn't become like this Force god, but he becomes like this really powerful individual. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.